My name is Jeremy Walton, and today we're going to talk about cinematic filmmaking, episode 2. Let's go! How's everyone doing? Yeah, same for me. I wasn't planning on doing another video like this for a while. They do take some time to put together, but not going out tends to limit my options. Before you even think about watching this video, you need to watch the first episode to really kick off this series and understand what I'm trying to accomplish. So if you're still watching, I'm going to assume you've done that already. As we mentioned in the first video, there really isn't a clear-cut definition of the term cinematic. So I want to expand our conversation and bring you 3 more techniques I see people using or contributing to the so-called cinematic look. Keep an open mind and let's get started. First up, simply put, is dynamic range. I'm sure you've heard this term before and is commonly used as a selling feature of many cameras. A quick definition would be the ratio between the largest and smallest values that a certain quantity can assume. In this case, we're talking about a camera capturing the lightest and darkest part of an image without losing detail. Some cameras claim to have incredible dynamic range while others actually have it. This can all vary, but let's not wander down this rabbit hole. We also have highlight roll-off, base ISO, and so on. So let's just look at dynamic range as details in the highlights and shadows. Then let's ask ourselves, does obtaining these details give us a cinematic look? I want to jump back to 2011 and have a look at the film Like Crazy, directed by Drake Doremus. The reason I'm mentioning this film is because it was shot on a DSLR Canon 7D that won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance and sold for $4 million. This is a camera I used to own. Kind of crazy at the equipment we have now, even what our cell phones are capable of. But in 2011, a 7D was retrofitted with a PL mount to shoot this movie. I'm sure dynamic range wasn't a top priority. Not saying it wasn't thought about. I'm sure time of day, location, all played a part in those decisions. The cinematographer John Gulsarian talks about image and how it holds up on the big screen. He says, a lot of people can figure it out right away, but most people have no idea what it was shot on or care. Storytelling isn't about resolution or compression. Now I know this might stir up some debate, but the only reason I bring this up is because we have technology now that surpasses the 7D. And if you think you need better dynamic range to get a cinematic look, it's just not always the case. Sometimes blowing out your highlights is the look you're going for. One example is the 2002 film Minority Report, directed by Steven Spielberg. Shot on film, it definitely had a distinct look, taking advantage of a process called bleach bypass. What I want you to pay attention to is the highlights. The film's cinematographer Janusz Kaminski says, the film is overlit on purpose, with bleach bypassing and its consequent desaturation of colors, giving Minority Report a somewhat washed out look. When talking about the look of the film, he goes on to say, the highlights become much more severe in terms of not seeing any details. The blue skies get eliminated, the shadows become really dark, and the grain structure gets altered, making it grittier. If we associate high dynamic range with a cinematic look, we can see the opposite to be true here. The filmmakers chose a look that best fit the story, regardless of what is considered cinematic. And what was the result? A pretty cinematic look. Number 2 on my list is handheld versus stabilized. Let's start with handheld, and an obvious director that comes to mind is Paul Greengrass, and you may know him from the Jason Bourne movies, which, if you're looking for some handheld work in cinema, this is a prime example, especially with the fight scenes. Although I don't want to get into those movies, I want to focus on the 2013 movie Captain Phillips. Both the director and cinematographer, Barry Ackroyd, have backgrounds in documentaries, and are both known for their use of handheld camera work. Barry Ackroyd explains the experience as, it was walking in there handheld documentary style, using every frame of the shot to tell the story. There was some criticism with the handheld work, which Greengrass responded to. I love to bring those people out onto the ocean in a 4-foot swell and say, well, how exactly would you get stable images? He has a point. Can you really just lay down some track? I really want to sum this up with the last scene of the movie. The filmmakers were trying to place the viewer into the story, and the last scene did just that. I remember feeling like I was there and experiencing the scene unfolding before me. This scene wasn't even in the script. It was something they threw together with a few lights and real crew that turned out to be one of the best scenes of the movie. What I want you to take away from this when we're talking handheld is handheld wasn't shoved or forced into this movie. The The story called for it and the filmmakers embraced it. The reason I think handheld sometimes gets a bad rap is one of the same reasons I talked about in the first episode of this series. People see movies they like, find a specific technique used in that movie, then try to apply it to their own work, thinking they'll get the same cinematic results. The difference between choosing to shoot handheld and maybe not having a budget or lack of equipment and being forced to shoot handheld. I think that happens a lot and it's totally understandable, but understanding the difference is important. Now let's jump over to stabilized footage and one director that stands out, David Fincher. Need I say more? Of course I do, don't be ridiculous. There's a lot I can talk about when it comes to his movies, but I'm going to focus on the Netflix original series, Mindhunter, which Fincher was the executive producer and directed a handful of episodes. Handheld is something that doesn't really come up a lot with his work. Not saying he doesn't use it, it's there, but rarely used. Like in Captain Phillips, the handheld work made you feel a part of the scene. Fincher's work makes you feel there's no camera operator at all. He refers to this as the omnipresent quality. Combined with the visual effects he uses, it tends to blend seamlessly. When the cinematographer Eric Messerschmidt described the look of Mindhunter, he said, "We don't do any handheld. We don't have Steadicam or carry a Steadicam operator. If a director wants to come in to move the camera, we don't say no, but it has to be done with the tools available and stability of the image is vital." That's how serious they take their camera work, or should I say how serious they take the look of the series. He goes on to say, rolling on a slightly bumpy floor or doing a crane move where the crane has a little wiggle in it or whatever, being able to take that out in post very much informs David's aesthetic. It lets the show maintain that very ethereal, almost robotic look, letting the camera be anonymous in the storytelling process. What a drastic contrast to a handheld look. Two very different approaches on how a story is told, even though they both are based on or inspired by actual events. One wants you to be a part of the scene, while the other, simply put, from a cinematography standpoint, the show is very much about coverage and sequencing. The scenes are long, so we are playing with shot design to build tension or accent certain pieces of information. As you can see from these two examples, it's not about applying a technique. It really comes down to what's the best way to tell the story. If you haven't already, watch these two films or anything from these two directors with this topic in mind. Up next is number 3, is film cinematic. We're literally talking about movies shot on film. Does that automatically give you cinematic results? Of course, I'm gonna give you some examples and some things to think about. Not too long ago, I was sitting in the theater and the trailer for the 2019 film Uncut Gems started. Right away, I knew this was shot on film. I grew up watching movies projected on film in the theater, and maybe that's why it has a bigger impact on me compared to someone who's grown up in the world of high-resolution, sharp, digital projected movies. We have a very distinct look for this film. The cinematographer, Darius Kanji, described it as, "It's gritty, but in the 80s sense of it gritty, with a lot of light and contrast." I started being a cinematographer in the 80s, so they went back to this period of time where we're after very strong ink blacks, very long lenses, very contrasty images, very harsh contours. If you watch this film, did the filmmakers accomplish what they were after? Did the gritty 80s look come through? Did they shoot on film because it was cinematic, or did they find the right medium to tell their story? I'll let you decide. Oh, and by the way, some of the film was shot digitally. I don't know what scenes or what camera, but could you even tell? Another interesting example was the 2014 film Nightcrawler, written and directed by Dan Gilroy. I bring this film up because it was shot by cinematographer Robert Elswit, who is a fan of film, and I did have a thought. A lot of directors or cinematographers still shoot film, but a question comes to mind. Do they shoot film because it's still superior to digital, or because that's what they've been doing for years and given the choice, they choose film? I thought of this when Robert Elswit said, "I shot the day exterior and day interior on film, just because it's so much easier and simpler and less frustrating for me." The same could be said for someone who started using digital. Given the choice, they may stick to what they know best. Having said that though, digital was used as well. With a strict budget and 26 days to shoot 40 locations, they didn't have a whole lot of time to set up and light everything. He said, "The night work I thought was really right for digital. I didn't have to light the backgrounds. I didn't have to do much to anything far away. That's what digital gives you. It gives you a higher ASA and you can push a little bit." And watching this film, you could see how the actual locations are part of the story. It showed LA in a completely different light and avoided the usual scenery you'd expect being in Los Angeles. So now we have digital mixed with film for different reasons with cinematic results. With these examples, there really isn't a specific thing that creates a cinematic image. There's actually a lot of things that make a film work. One thing I find common among a lot of these films I talk about is there is always a discussion about the look of the film. It starts off that way and eventually builds to how they can accomplish that look, which always involves camera and lenses. I want you to remember this isn't necessarily a right versus wrong discussion. When it comes to film, I can talk about this all day. I really enjoy making these types of videos. As a filmmaker, knowledge is important. What you should do is absorb as much knowledge as you can. So when you want to shoot something, you can take that knowledge and base your decisions on what other people have done, and more importantly, done well and why. Whether you're a director, cinematographer, or just work in other departments of film, being able to express your ideas in this way can only help you. Well, there you have it. What is Cinematic Filmmaking Episode 2? Hope you enjoyed the video. Hit that like button because there's definitely more in the way. Subscribe so you don't miss out. But until then, comment below if you have anything to add to Cinematic Filmmaking. And as for this episode, it's a wrap.